What's going on, y'all? Chuck Nunface here, and today I wanted to go over a couple of knives that have come to me recently here. The ones that I've got here on the table. I've got the McNees knives, PM Mac 2 3.5. Kind of a mouthful right there. And I also have the Les George VECP or VECP. All right, and so these are both Midtech knives. Now, let's kind of talk about what is Midtech. The term was coined by Ken Onion years back, and it's really kind of taken on a life of its own. And frankly, it's got so many different meanings now. What is Midtech? What isn't? What's custom? The lines between Midtech, custom, and production have kind of become blurred over the years. But essentially, we're looking at generally custom makers that have some parts outsourced, be it in the US or from a foreign country, and they do some things in-house, and they finish assembly in-house, oftentimes sharpen in-house, things like that. Fit and finish is all done in-house. So it kind of varies as to what would actually constitute a mid-tech. But in any case, I don't want to get too in the weeds on that. Essentially, what we've got here is two mid-tech knives. And so these are fairly prominent makers. Les George, of course, has been making customs for years, as well as John McNees. Les George has worked with several different companies as far as, having some of his customs done in production models from ZT and Spartan, and just to name a couple right there. And McNees has partnered up with ProTech, to get it just very recently. It was just at the Blade Show 2022. They announced the Automac, and so essentially what we've got here is we've got a couple of American knife makers, and these are their production versions of their custom knives. And so I kind of wanted to do this video because there's some similarities among these knives, even though at first blush they really don't look all that alike. But I couldn't help but draw a lot of similar lines between these two knives as I was kind of using them and carrying them and everything else. Now the Mac 2 I've had for a few weeks now, and this one is fairly just came in just a couple days ago. The VECP. So we'll kind of break it down on some of the similarities, differences, and we'll even do it in a different format, something that I've never done before. We're going to call it the Midtech Showdown. All right, and so I've broken it down into some categories here, where we've got the McNees on one end and the Les George on the other. And I'm going to try to kind of decide, in my own opinion, this is all subjective and this is just anecdotal and my own personal opinions on how I'm scoring these two different knives. And so the categories will be overall size, steel, action, construction, fit and finish, grind, presentation, utility, cost, and what is done in-house. And so kind of looking at things first. Looking at size of these two knives. They both have 3.5 inch blades. Now, I'm going to move that out of the way. Get our little scorecard out of the way here. One of the things that I noticed right off the bat from the McNees was how efficient it was in its use of size. So as you can see here, they both have the same size blade. They both have 3.5 inch blades. But how compact and how efficient John McNees has designed the Mac 2, and really the Mac 2, the 3 inch and the 3.5 inch, where there's really no wasted space. Now, I'm not a big proponent, excuse me, I gotta get a little sip of drink here. I'm not a huge proponent of blade to handle ratios or anything like that. It really doesn't matter to me. And it would never be a deciding factor in a knife, in all likelihood, if I was going to be, kind of choosing between two different designs. But it struck me from day one when I held one of these in hand. I did do a review on a loaner that I had of the Mac 2 a couple of months back. And it was one of the things that really kind of struck me, is how efficient it was in its use of size. So essentially you've got a 3.5 inch blade and just a hair over a 3.5 inch handle. On this one, you've got a 3.5 inch blade and you've got over a 4 inch handle on this one. About 4.25 inches. And so it's just really impressive on the use of size on that. So that really just kind of struck me with the Mac 2. Now, I'm not saying one is better than the other, but if I'm going to take somewhat of an objective look at it, I would say that its use and its size efficiency, I'd have to give that one to the Mac 2. Now, steel. The Les George CTS XHP. The Mac 2 is, this particular one is in MagnaCut. Now, there's been a lot of different varieties of this one. The one I had on loan was XHP also. There's been 20 CV. There's probably been some other steels down the line that John's used as well. I really wouldn't have minded. I know MagnaCut is, you know, kind of the hot new girl at school that everybody's checking out. But I mean, really, it's not one that I was actively seeking. But you know, this is what was available, and so I ended up picking it up in MagnaCut. XHP, if you've watched the channel before, you know I'm a huge fan of XHP. This and S90V are my two favorite stainlesses. And so XHP's been around for a while. Love the way it sharpens, love the way it performs, takes an awesome polish. So I definitely like some XHP. Now, looking at it from a scoring standpoint, you know, it's a tough call. All right, XHP has been around for a long time. It's proven. I've used it a whole bunch. Now, on paper, MagnaCut, it's got all the things that you would want. It's got good edge retention, good toughness, good corrosion resistance, but it's largely unproven. You're starting to see it come into the market a lot more in a lot of different knives, and everybody's talking about it, and it will probably end up being, you know, the new S35EN, the new M390. It's going to kind of replace those steels, I think, moving forward. You know, the knife community needs a new steel to have as a favorite in its production folders every 5 years or so. So it looks like it's MagnaCut's turn. S45 came out at a weird time. It looked like that was going to be the one that replaced S35, but it looks like MagnaCut's probably going to be the one that replaces both S35 and M390, and it's just going to be, you know, the EDC knife steel of choice. Now, I don't think we're at a point where it's going to be heat treated for quite some time. Heat treated properly, and you know, where the protocols are going to be followed, and they're going to be maximizing MagnaCut. I think it's going to be ubiquitous, and it's going to be in a lot of different folders, but I don't think we're going to see a lot of companies heat treating it and cryoing it properly and everything else. Now, this, I did talk to John. It has been treated to 63 HRC. I don't know what Les does his XHP to. So when we're looking at steel, you know, initially I thought this was going to be a push because it's kind of a matter of opinion, but I am going to go ahead and give it to Les George with the XHP. Reason being, it's the proven steel. It's one of my favorites, so yeah, I'm letting my bias come in on it a little bit. Now, you know, your virgin collectors will probably say MagnaCut is the best thing out there, and it's I'm crazy for thinking the way I do, but you know, the Chad users are going to agree with me when I say XHP. So that is put to bed, in my opinion. Action. Two different styles, two different presentation styles. We've got bearings on this guy, and it does have a really good bearing action. I did need to adjust the pivot a little bit. It's funny because the one that I had on loan, I didn't want to fiddle with it too much because it wasn't mine. But I would have adjusted the lock bar a little tighter on that one. Turns out I needed to adjust the lock bar the other way on this one because the detent was a little bit firm. And then I just kind of tightened the pivot down a little bit, and I think it's perfect as far as an action goes for a bearing knife. Now this one, now here I am flubbing it on camera, but this one is on washers. This hasn't really broken in yet. The pivot is a little tight. It's a little tight on purpose. And that's simply because, you know, we wanted to kind of get it dialed in and everything else. So it's a little bit different. But I do love a nice washer action. Now this one is not going to drop shut by any stretch. It may do that down the road when things kind of mate together and break in a little bit. You know, it's not going to be like a nicely done bearing knife right out of the box where, or at least after a little fine tuning, it just kind of drops shut the way you like it to. So this one will likely never be like that. It will get better with time and use. But as of right now, it is a pretty stiff washer action, but it is snappy in its presentation, and I like that. So generally speaking, I do prefer washers over bearings, but I'm going to kind of put my personal bias aside a little bit on this one, and I will say this is going to appeal to more people. The bearing action on the McNees, it's got my drop shut. It does fly right open. The D10 is nicely tuned. Now, granted, I had to fiddle with it a little bit to get it the way I wanted to, but I haven't really had any reason to complain about the action on this one. So I'm going to go ahead and give that to the Mac 2. Let's see, construction. We've got full tie scales, no liners. It's all going to be flow-through construction. It's got two barrel spacers on both sides. I don't believe they are shouldered on either one. Interestingly enough, they just use screws on one side on both models as well. Okay, so TI spring clips, dual thumb studs on both models. Got some jimping on both models. I mean, really, construction overall, I mean, it's a pick 'em. You really can't decide which one's going to be better constructed. I mean, really, when it comes to build quality, I think this one is an even push. We don't even really have to talk about it that much. It's going to be a tie on that one. There's no, it's a pick 'em on this. They're both very well made, very high quality. Both makers are obviously proud of the things that they do, and so I wouldn't worry about that in either case. Fit and finish. Now, as you can see, kind of going along with the construction, they're both finished very well too. This one is obviously, it's got some anno done to it, but they're both in a stone wash. On the surface, they're both good. Now, interestingly enough, they both came from their respective makers with flaws. In the case of the McNees, it has not been corrected, and what we're looking at right here is, it's going to be a little tough to show. I'll do my best to show it. It's kind of a nitpick. It's not a super big deal, but these two screws right here, they're not completely flush with the scale. There's little protrusions right there. I actually showed it to Jonathan McNees, and he was like, oh man, we missed that. That's supposed to be flush, sorry about that. It's not a big deal. This is certainly not a deal breaker for me. Definitely not a deal breaker for me. But it is something to note that, it wasn't, listen, everybody's human, but it didn't come back from out of the shop perfect. And it wasn't up to their spec either. And John even admitted that. So it is what it is. It's something that I can fix. I don't know if I ever will. I certainly won't send it in to have it done, but it's something that's not going to be difficult to fix should I choose to do it. I mean, you could do it with sandpaper, you could take a Dremel to it. I mean, whatever you want to do. Obviously, you take your screws out first and then just kind of grind them down a little bit or sand them down, because it's really not much, but you can notice it. I may do nothing about it at all. So, not that big a deal. This knife, it actually came from the factory, kind of off-center. Now, it is fine now. It's a little annoying, though, when you get a knife, and it comes in, and you're checking it out and everything else, and it's kind of like a big old wah-wah when it's wonky and off-center. Now, what I did was I went ahead and I took it apart and I cleaned it, because oftentimes knives, they can be, what's called factory dirty. And you go ahead and you clean it off a little bit, and you go ahead and kind of get it dialed in. And I reassembled it, tightened the pivot just a little bit more, and got it all taken care of. So it's good to go now. It's not an issue anymore. But as you can see, that might be also contributing to, the action being a little bit stiffer and not being, super, you've got to be pretty deliberate with your flipper or with your opening action right there. You got to be pretty deliberate with it. And so a couple of things right off the bat, coming from the respective shops where, there was some flaws coming from the shops. Overall though, I mean, other than those two little things, the quality's there. The fit and finish is there. It was just a couple of things that were kind of goose eggs, or kind of just warts on the overall presentation. But generally speaking, not a problem. I'm going to go ahead and give fit and finish both high quality. Both came with some flaws, but not that big a deal. We're going to go ahead and call that a push. Moving on, looking at the grinds. Both ground very well. They're both flat grinds. This one obviously has that dramatic, from your thumb rest right there with your jimping, and then it's got more of a dramatic ledge and a drop off to the spear point. This one, of course, is straight down, but also with a swedge. Both flat grinds, as I said. I believe the McNees would be a little bit thinner behind the edge than the Les George. I don't have calipers, but I believe he shoots for 0.10, so 10 thous behind the edge on these. Could be the case, and that, it leads to a pretty small secondary bevel as well. This one is certainly going to be a little more pointy and everything else, so their grind styles are different, but the grinds are both very well done. They're nice and even. That I haven't noticed any inconsistencies on them. They're both done very evenly. The one thing I would say, they're both done well, but I don't love the way they sharpen the McNees to the factory. It kind of leaves you with no tip, or really there's a lot to be desired in the overall tip itself right there. Now I've gone ahead and resharpened this. I didn't bring the edge bevel back, maybe just a degree, really didn't mess with it that much. But the tip is just pretty much non-existent on these when you get them. And it's funny because I was actually chatting with John again, and he's kind of stubborn in the sense that he kind of wants to keep it a little thicker at the end for strength and everything else. He doesn't want to kind of get that, I don't know, I guess dropped back and laid back tip. But he says maybe I just need to change my mind because a lot of people have been saying that, I guess. So if I had to give it from a grinding perspective, and a lot of this is just because of my own personal preferences, I want a tip on my knives, and this one really doesn't have a tip to speak of. So in the final sharpening, it needed to be sharpened in my book right away. So I'm going to go ahead and give grind to the Les George VECP. Presentation. Now, when I'm talking about presentation, I'm talking about not fit and finish, but the way it's done. So this one has milling, and this one is, anodized. Obviously they both come in just plain old, stone wash versions and things like that. And this one, the only thing that makes it different is just the bronze undertone with the green anodization. So when it comes to that presentation, they're both done very well. This is definitely more of a dark stone wash, while this is more of, on the Les George, it's more of a mirror stone wash. It's kind of, I don't love the stone wash on the scales, but I like the stone wash on the blade more than I like the stone wash on the McNees. This is almost like a dark stone wash, maybe even an acid wash. So it's going to be much more personal preference, but I'm going to go ahead and give presentation to the VECP as well. Moving on, we've got utility. Both knives are going to be great EDC knives, no matter how you look at it. This is going to be a little more pocket friendly in the sense that, it does make that really good use of size. This is going to take up a little bit more real estate in your pocket, but it's going to, either one is going to be able to take care of any sort of EDC task that you want to throw at it. This is going to be a little stabbier, of course, so if you need to do piercing cuts and things like that, it's going to excel at that more. And this is just, with that sloping blade profile. This one really, in my opinion, is a really good all-around EDC style knife. I'm going to go ahead and, primarily because the first time I handled one of these and the loaner that I had, I really thought this knife begged to be used for work. And it just looked like it was a complete utility type knife. I was even cutting drywall with it that first day that I had it, or that first week that I had it with me. And this knife just kind of screamed work and utility to me. So I'm going to go ahead and give the utility factor, and I just mean from an EDC standpoint, over to the McNees. Looking at cost, they're both pretty much the same. We're looking at Midtechs. They're not cheap, but they both deliver in their price, their price points, I guess is the word I'm looking for. The base on the McNees is going to be a little bit more than it would be on the George. And anytime you get milling over plain, TI, it's going to add a little bit more to the cost as well. But they're very close in cost, where I really wouldn't consider it to be a deciding factor in either of these knives. If you're looking to get either one of these, you're not worried about $25, $50 going in either direction on this knife. It shouldn't be a deal breaker or a decision maker. In my opinion, your mileage may vary. So from a cost perspective, I'm going to go ahead. They're similar enough. I'm just going to call that a push. Now, the in-house category, what I'm talking about is what is done in-house. Now, Jonathan McNees, he finishes the blades and he finishes the knives all in-house. However, he says, he gets them sourced 100% US, but his materials and his work is done at outside places. I don't know exactly which. It may rotate, and maybe at one point they're doing blades in-house. Sometimes they're doing blades. They're outsourcing the blades to another US firm. Maybe they're doing scales in-house. It's going to be a different set of things that's going on in-house and out-of-house. But he has been adamant, and there's no reason to believe otherwise, that it is all 100% in the US. Now, obviously, final assembly happens in-house, sharpening happens in-house, but I believe, and somebody can correct me, or Jonathan himself can correct me, I believe he has a lot of things sent out as far as parts go and things like that. US sourced, of course. Work is done in the US through US companies and US OEMs, but it is, I believe more is done, through third parties and everything else. Now, on Les George's website, he says the only thing that he sends out is the blades. They're machine ground, but everything else he does in-house. I haven't spoken with Les George about this, but once again, no reason to believe otherwise. And so in what I would consider a category that doesn't hold a whole lot of weight, at least in my mind, I'm going to have to go ahead and give it to Les George on that one, simply because he does more things in-house than Jonathan McNees does with the, I got it off camera, than he does with the PM2, or the Mac2, I should say, the PM Mac2. It's a little confusing. So as you see, when we're kind of lining it all up, it looks like we've got size for the McNees, steel going to the Les George, action going to the McNees, a push on the construction, a push on the fit and finish, utility going to the McNees, the cost being a push, and the in-house construction on this Midtech going to the Les George for a total of 4, and a total of 3 on the McNees. That's what I have. Now, what does that mean overall? Frankly, it means nothing. It really doesn't mean nothing. You can't go wrong with either one of these. This knife scores a little higher in the categories that I've somewhat arbitrarily set up for it than the McNees does. I really like a lot of things about this knife. And so really, I like a lot of things about both these knives. So really what it would come down to for me, and what it should come down to for you, is which one would you choose to buy? I wouldn't base my decision on what I've seen in this video, because as a matter of fact, even though in my own scoring system, the Les George wins out, this is the knife that I would keep. And the reason being is because the first time I held one, I knew that it was one that I just had to get. It's kind of rare when I borrow a knife and I'm like, I need to get one of these for myself. It doesn't happen all the time. I have a lot of knives come through, friends on Instagram let me check them out and everything else. And so I have a lot of knives come through and everything. So it isn't often where I get one in my hands and I make it a mission where I'm like, I've got to get one of these. So interestingly enough, I'm actually, even though it's fairly new, I'm actually just struck a deal to trade this one. It's an awesome knife. It really is. There's a lot to like about it. I really do like it. But I'm actually trading it for a different Les George. I'm trading it for the Talos. I think there's a lot of things that these knives are very similar at. This is the one that I really just gravitate towards and I feel like I've got to have. And I knew that from the first moment that I picked one up. This, I really like it. There's a lot to love, but I think I'd like the Talos just a little bit more. It's a little bit longer. I think these knives are very similar in performance. I think they do a lot of the same things. I think this knife just does it a little bit better. And so I want to get a knife that's going to be a bit of a different profile. So I've gone ahead and I have made a trade deal as of today, June 6, 2022, to go ahead and ship this off to a buddy, and he's going to be sending me a Talos, and this one is going to be the keeper. In any case, wow, it's a long video, but I appreciate y'all checking it out. Let me know what you thought of my system. Am I full of it? Is it a bunch of bullshit, or is it halfway decent? Any other different categories that you'd like to see in the future if I were to do this again? Would you even want to see me do something like this again? Go ahead and give me a follow if you haven't done so already, or subscribe using that button there. Give me a follow on Instagram at Chuck_Nunface. And yeah, just stay tuned and I will get some other things going. I got a couple things in the pipeline right now. Go ahead and turn on those alerts and you'll get those notifications when I got a new video dropping. All right, thanks a lot, y'all.